So, once again, Your Excellency, Mike Rann, Australian Ambassador to Italy, and Sasha Caruazzo, Professor Ray Francis, Dean of Arts, Monash University, Professor Mark Del Rez, President of IASA, the acronym for the European Association for Studies of Australia, Dr. Cecilia Hewlett, Director, Monash Prato Centre, conference delegates. Good morning and welcome, Ayubowan. After all our cyber conversations across the globe and within Australia during almost 1 year of planning this conference, it's wonderful to meet and greet at last and continue the dialogue in the warmth of this beautiful, historic and sensuous city of Prato. I'm Associate Professor Chandani Lokuge, Chair of the Convening Committee of the 2014 IASA International Conference, hosted this year by Arts Faculty of Monash University, Australia. This year's conference is titled Encountering Australia, Transcultural Conversations. As our program shows, the conference has attracted a diverse cluster of papers that I'm sure will develop a vibrant platform for intellectual and creative inquiry into the many variations of the theme, well beyond the duration of this conference. May I now invite Professor Ray Francis to deliver her words of welcome and introduce the ambassador. Your Excellency, thank you for accepting our invitation to launch the conference. It is a pleasure to have you and your wife with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chandani. On behalf of Monash University, I want to extend you all a very, very warm welcome to our beautiful centre here in Prato, especially His Excellency, the Honourable Mike Rann, and his wife, Sasha Caruazzo. Also to Professor Mark Del Rey and members of IASA. And it's great to see so many people here from so many different parts of Europe, but also from further afield. We have representatives here from Turkey and as far away as China. So a very, very warm welcome to you all, and also to the Australian delegates here, many of whom are my colleagues and my former colleagues. It's lovely to see so many familiar faces. And it's my great pleasure now to introduce you to Australia's ambassador to Italy, San Marino, Libya and Albania, the Honourable Mike Rann. He's also the permanent representative to the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organisation and the World Food Programme. He's been in Rome since May Day. It's a great day to take up your new job, I think, in Italy. And before that, he was Australia's High Commissioner in London. And I'm sure he's very well known to the Australian delegates here for his long and distinguished career in Australian politics. And those two words don't often go together, I'm afraid. He's one of the longest-serving premiers of the state of South Australia. He was there for almost 10 years and has spent 26 years in the South Australian Parliament, beginning his career there, I think, as a speechwriter for Don Dunstan, if I'm not mistaken. Now, most importantly, from our point of view, he's an arts graduate. When people say to you, what becomes of arts graduates? I just say, well, look around you. Mike has an arts degree, a bachelor's degree and a master's degree from Auckland University. And I like to think that that's partly responsible for his wonderful contribution that he's made over his years in politics as an advocate for the arts and as an advocate for a lot of social causes that I think many of us would support. Particularly, he's passionate about social inclusion and action on climate change. And for the purposes of our conference today, he's also been a really important supporter of the South Australian Film Corporation. So many of the films that people here are studying and will be talking about over the next few days are in existence because of support from the South Australian Film Corporation. Without further ado then, I would like to invite His Excellency, the Honourable Mike Rann, to officially open the conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Grazie, Professor Ray Francis, Dean of Arts, and to Dr. Cecilia Hewlett, Director of the Monash Prato Centre, to Professor Chandani Lokuge, and also a special welcome today to Kim Scott, our keynote speaker. Really looking forward to hearing from Kim. To all the delegates, buongiorno a tutti voi. I am delighted to be here, not only as Australia's ambassador to Italy, but someone who thinks that the cause of Australian studies in Europe is really important. I think Monash showed extraordinary vision in establishing this Prato Centre back in 2001. The Centre and the European Association for Studies of Australia, founded back in 1989, have together become a dynamic 21st century bridge between Italy and Australia, renewing through research and conferences like this the rich ties founded on massive Italian migration, European migration to Australia, particularly over the last century. And that's why the theme of this conference, Encountering Australia, Transcultural Conversations, is so important. And I'm so pleased that the conference has such a strong focus on Indigenous issues. In Australia, there is no more important conversation. And here in Europe, I've found a strong interest from people in wanting to know more about Australia's Indigenous history and culture. Last year, I opened the giant Australian Landscapes exhibition at the Royal Academy in London. The feedback from visitors was overwhelming that the part of the exhibition that they were most enthralled about, excited about, and wanted to see was the Indigenous works that were rich with colour and ancient stories and illustrating the memories, the ceremonies and the relationship to country shared by Aboriginal people across a vast and diverse continent that pays no heed to modern state and territory borders. And we've just had the same reaction here in Italy to the wonderful Dreamings exhibition recently opened in Rome. So if you're going up to the Borghese Gardens, please have a look at it. And just yesterday I was speaking to the Mayor of Rome, who wants to see if he can be involved in sending Roman antiquities in Australia, lending them to us, and then also welcoming back a giant Indigenous exhibition. For Australians, Indigenous art shows us how to look at our country with eyes that have seen it and known it for a long, long time. Art, literature and theatre and music creates a window through which Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians can more effectively communicate. It is building bridges. So I'm very much looking forward to Kim's lecture. Australia is also, of course, one of the most migrant countries in the world. For countless migrants, Australia has represented opportunity warmed by the sun, a relatively safe, peaceful and prosperous island continent that offers enormously enhanced life chances for migrants and their children. And I guess I'm an example of that. I have 3 citizenships. I left London as a schoolboy when I was 9, when my working-class parents emigrated to New Zealand. Later, at the age of 24, I migrated to Adelaide. 8 years later, I was elected to the South Australian Parliament. That can happen in very few places in the world. My wife Sasha, who is with us here today, was born in Australia. Her Pugliese parents migrated from Italy. Her father took a job as a hairdresser, and to encourage him to learn English, his boss cut his pay in half until he increased his proficiency, even though he had a mortgage to pay and 2 young daughters to raise. These days, Australia is proudly multicultural. Instead of the melting pot where other countries ask migrants to wave goodbye to their heritage and culture, as well as to their homes and families, Australia has become a stronger, richer nation by asking migrants to share their culture, language and cuisines with their fellow Australians. Recently at the wonderful Salento International Film Festival in Puglia, I launched the Melbourne film Lygon Street Si Parla Italiano. It tells the story of the development of Melbourne's Little Italy from the 1950s until now. It deals with a number of difficult subjects, including initial suspicion and prejudice, through to not only an acceptance, but a celebration of Italian culture in Australia. Sir James Gobbo, former Governor of Victoria and patron of the Prato Centre, is amongst the great characters featured in this documentary, and I strongly recommend it to you. I'm sure your discussions at this conference will also focus on identity, about what it means to be Australian, about what it means for a migrant to become Australian. 2 years ago, someone asked me whether being a citizen of 3 countries meant that I had, quote, divided loyalties, unquote. This was after more than 30 years of Australian citizenship, of raising 2 children in Australia, of serving 26 years as an MP. I found the question offensive. Of course, I'm proud of my London roots and family ties, and of my New Zealand education, which enabled me to be the first in my extended family ever go to university. There's no doubt that my time in the politics department at Auckland University gave me the groundings I needed to eventually become Premier of South Australia. But like so many migrants, I am very much a passionate and proud Australian, and it interests me every year that the majority of people who attend Australia Day events were not born in Australia. Perhaps one of the best examples I know is the appointment just a few weeks ago of a Vietnamese-born Australian, Hugh Van Lee, as Governor of South Australia. Hugh arrived in Australia the same year I did, in 1977. I came by plane. Fleeing the Vietnam War and its aftermath, Hugh and his wife came to Australia by steering a small leaking boat. They were refugees. The journey was perilous. And just as they saw the white sands of northern Australia shimmering before them at dawn, with the sound of seagulls overhead which woke them, which Hugh describes to him as the sound of angels, a boat approached them at high speed with sticks pointing out. When it got closer, they were obviously scared. 2 fishermen with zinc-creamed noses approached in their tinny. One raised a stubby in salute and shouted, "G'day, mate, welcome to Australia." Hugh and his wife were embraced by Australia and became key leaders of the Vietnamese and wider multicultural community, in doing so honouring their past while celebrating their future. They named their 2 sons after 2 of Australia's most famous cricketers, Don Bradman and Kim Hughes. Australia is continuing to change. Economically, we're much more aligned with Asia than we were back in the 50s, 60s and 70s. This makes sense. For years it was said that Australia's development was hampered by the tyranny of distance. That phrase meant, of course, that we were a long way from our traditional trading partners in the UK and Europe. With Asia, we have the advantage of adjacency, located to the fastest growing region in the world that will dominate the next century, and already 75% of Australian exports are to Asia. Australia is gearing up for further economic and cultural engagement with Asia, with Julie Bishop's new Colombo plan and following the report of the Asia Century White Paper, which recommended that every Australian school offer an Asian language, Mandarin, Japanese, Indonesian, Korean or Hindi. So cultural engagement and economic engagement must go hand in hand for real, lasting and positive relations. However, this greater embrace of Asia does not mean a lessening of ties with Europe. The UK, for instance, is the second biggest investor after the US in Australia, with more than $500 billion worth of investment. Italy and Australia, both members of the G20, are already strong trading partners, with the trade balance at present firmly in Italy's favour. However, there is strong interest from Australian business in the current economic reform agenda now being pursued in Italy. But today we focus on education, where links between Australia and Italy are also growing. Last year, 5,377 Italians studied in Australia. This represents an increase of 37% from 2012. There's been an average increase of 30% each year for the past 5 years. And Italy now has the second highest number of students in Australia of all European countries after the UK. Education is important economically for Australia. It is now our third largest export industry. But of course it's much bigger and broader than that. The friendships and contacts made through education often last for decades, and so does the cultural understanding that comes with studying abroad. Young people come home with a broader understanding of the world as well as their host country. And that's why Monash's Prato Centre, EASA and this conference are so important. And let's today remember that great pioneer of this relationship, Professor Bernard Hickey, who hosted your conference in Lecce in 2001 and who for decades promoted Australian studies in Italy and Europe. And I'm so pleased to see his friends from the universities of Salento and Udine here with us today. We thank Professor Hickey and honour him by our presence here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that marvellous, warm and welcoming note. I think we'd better go directly into our keynote session just so that we run to a tight schedule. If you'd like to walk down and sit, and Kim would like to walk up, that will help me. Thank you. Again. You've got 3 minutes to introduce you, and we get started. Okay. Yes. Hello again. And now, it is my honour and pleasure to introduce Kim Scott, renowned novelist and professor of writing at Curtin University in Western Australia. The importance of Kim's contributions to Australian culture has long been recognised and celebrated. As well as being twice awarded Australia's highest literary honour, the Miles Franklin, Kim's novels are recipients of the Kate Shellis Rucker Award, the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, the ALS Gold Medal, and twice the Western Australian Premier's Fiction Award. Kim has also been awarded an Australian Centenary Medal and was the 2012 Western Australian of the Year. Beyond all this national and international acclaim, a compelling power of much of Kim's work lies in his consummate artistry in encompassing important public issues in intimate storytelling. That Dead Man Dance, for instance, envisions an alternative private narrative within the official story of the Australian nation, and in doing so, invites us to reimagine first contact and even make contact anew with the language and beliefs of the Noongar people. It is in this way that the judges of the Miles Franklin celebrated the text as one that, and I quote, shifts our sense of what an historical novel can achieve. These themes of cross-cultural dialogue in Kim's fiction meet with his wider work in language recovery. He is the founder and chair of the Widlamin, right? Widlamin? He'll do it better when he talks about it. Noongar Language Stories project that, among other achievements, has produced these 4 beautiful Noongar English language picture books. With their bilingual mode of storytelling, these books return their language to the community, to the Noongar people, but they reach much further again than that. Speaking of his people, Kim suggests that the Noongar is associated, I quote, with a particular site, ceremony, and song that tells of the spirits of the past beyond a veil of death, acknowledging and speaking to those who have come to listen. Kim, today we have gathered to listen to you and to share in this rich heritage that your words so poignantly invoke. Kim's paper today is provocatively titled, "Where Have You Been?" He will speak for about 45 minutes and then take questions. Please welcome Professor Kim Scott.
Thank you very much, everyone. I'm very, very flattered that you're interested in what I might have to say. I was a little daunted hearing that list of achievements and found myself thinking, I used to be Kim Scott. What am I doing now? Where Have You Been is perhaps a provocative title. I'm thinking of it along the lines of, as you might say to someone who hasn't realised things have changed and transformed, where have you been? And you want them to listen. I'm also thinking of it in terms of speaking to someone who's been away, perhaps, and has come orbiting back, and you want to listen to them. So both those sort of things. I also feel obliged to point out at what may seem an amateurish sort of title slide. I was a bit concerned about the death by PowerPoint experience, so I want you to think about it more in terms of a slideshow or a magic lantern show. It's a lot of just snaps that I've collected there. So I think it's in fact a very small story that I want to tell today, perhaps very provincial, coming from a small group of people, descendants of those, as Jared Diamond says in Guns, Germs and Steel, those who first created society some millennia ago on the south coast, in my instance, the south coast of southwestern Australia, that corner of the oldest continent on the planet. It's a small story. To make it worse, perhaps, I want to begin by reading a few paragraphs of fiction, of a made-up story. To make it worse, and perhaps shameless act of self-promotion, it's a couple of extracts from a novel of mine from some 15 years ago. But perhaps to save face to some extent, I'm doing you a favour, all right? I'm going to read something like the first paragraph of the novel, and then I'm going to read something like the last paragraph. So I'll save you a great deal of trouble. You won't have to read the book yourself, and I'm told that it's a terribly hard thing to read anyway. So I think that's nonsense myself. So let me begin like this. One of the reasons I'm doing this is because I think it will lead into my argument, for want of a better phrase. But I'm also doing it for somewhat sentimental reasons. I hope you'll forgive me. I want to pay respect and to deeply honour the man that did the art that forms this cover, Terry Shiosaki, an Australian Aboriginal man with a Japanese name, who unfortunately, even though he's a little younger than myself, passed away a few days ago. So I particularly want to put that image up, that image of those tiny porcelain statues, those white figures somehow representing persistence in landscape. I know I make people uncomfortable and embarrass even those who come to hear me sing. I regret that, but not how all the talk and nervous laughter fades as I rise from the ground and, hovering in the campfire smoke, slowly turn to consider this small circle of which I am the centre. We feel it then, share the silence. I begin to sing. Sing? Perhaps that is not the right word, because it is not really singing. And it is not really me who sings, for although I touch the earth only once in my performance, leaving a single footprint in white sand and ash, through me we hear the rhythm of many feet pounding the earth and the strong pulse of countless hearts beating. Together we listen to the creak and rustle of various plants in various winds, the countless beatings of different wings, the many strange and musical calls of animals who have come from this place right here. And now let me skip to the end before I say anything else about this. I have written this story wanting to embrace all of you, and it is the best I can do in this language we share. Of course, there is an older tongue which also tells it. Even now we gather on chilly evenings, sometimes only a very few of us, sometimes more. We gather our strength in this way, from the heart of all of us. Pale, burnt and shrivelled, I hover in the campfire smoke and sing as best I can. I look out across the small crowd, hoping it will grow, hoping to see Uncle Will's children and those of his sisters and theirs in turn, and my father's other children. There is smoke and ash in my skin and in my heart too. I offer these words especially to those of you I embarrass and who turn away from the shame of seeing me. Or perhaps it is because your eyes smart as the wind blows the smoke a little toward you, and you hear something like a million many-sized hearts beating, and the whispering of waves, leaves, grasses. We are still here, Benin. So other than paying respect, as I said, to Terry, I wanted to start with that because the beginning is a metaphor for Indigenous language. I make these sounds through which you recognise authenticity, despite the look of one. And those last paragraphs are about developing community or gathering community in ancestral place, around sound, around language, and around story. And that's what I want to really speak about today, is that community development, wider than family, that's rooted, that's embedded, that abides in a particular place, a particular portion of the oldest continent on the planet, as I said. When I wrote that, I didn't know very much of my ancestral tongue, like many Aboriginal people in Australia, I think. And I was just wishing and hoping. Sounds like a song, doesn't it? Wishing and hoping. I was just wishing and hoping, longing really, and thinking that maybe language and place and community is integral, is the key to getting out of what is otherwise, it seems to me, the business of being trapped, buzzing in a reactive and adversarial situation of reacting against colonisation or the creation of a nation on that old continent. So I didn't know much language at that stage. I was just making up a story and hoping. But through serendipity, I think, perhaps, unless there's something in the power of story, even a novel, I very soon after became involved in an endangered language and story revitalisation project, for want of a better phrase. And that's what I want to get to as I rush through this 45 minutes. But I do want to speak a little bit more about Benang and this novel, because it's very much in that reactive loop. It's using the language of the archives, the language of our shared history at home, and was inspired by what I think is a rather nasty, extremely nasty photograph, which many of you may know. It's features in the rabbit-proof fence. It's a strange thing to inspire a novel, but it's certainly, I think, a visual representation of policies and programs, ways of thinking, if you like, applied to Aboriginal people for much of Australian history. I think it's about control. It's about separating and isolating individuals. It's about breeding out racial markers. It's about educating individuals into shame, denial and ignorance of their heritage, perhaps of their identity, and in a time when people were punished for speaking Aboriginal languages. And it very much features, if you can read the captions, the language of race, the language of racism. And it's from a book, Australia's Coloured Minority, Its Place in the Community. And in effect, this book, these policies of which it speaks, allowed for no place for Aboriginal people in the community, the Australian community. And it's something, it seems to me, that corresponds to a theory I find rather convincing, and I'm quite attached to, perverse as I am, articulated in a book, The Dark Side of the Dream, Bob Hodge and Vijay Mishra, in which they say, and I think it particularly applies to WA society more so than Australian society more widely, they say that our society, our shared society, began with fragments of the mother colony, which could only be held together by the threat of the Aboriginal other, and that community solidarity needs the fact that Aboriginal people are kept outside of that ring of society and in a specific power relationship. They argue in that book that in fact Australian identity is characterised by some sort of psychosis to do with that issue, that fissue. But to be fair, this is a very old photograph, 1948. And I like to think, or just to unpack and start breaking it apart, what if that boy at the end, shown as something like the ace in the pack, the mark of success of these policies, and carrying the privilege of whiteness, as some say, what if he knew his ancestral Aboriginal country? What if he knew his Aboriginal ancestral language and stories? What if he knew his Aboriginal family and community and his non-Aboriginal family? Would he still be excluded? Or where would he fit? Who would he be? Or what even if he was someone in the business of recovering those connections, language, community, place? Where would we position him? Would it make a difference? Would it help us to see things differently? Oops. And I put up an image from something I'm hoping that I will get to speak about, some of these picture books, looking through a whale's eye, seeing things differently. But since I've come all this way and in some sort of representative position, I want to complicate things a little more, if you'll bear with me. I'm only one voice. I don't particularly like to be a representative voice. There's many other voices in Australia that will say very different things to what I'm developing here. I think it's necessary to say, as in that photo where the markers of race loomed so large, The collective experience of racist oppression and of disadvantage feature really strongly in Aboriginal identity, Australian Aboriginal identity. I don't bear those markers of race. I also, as the boy in the photo, carry something of the privilege of whiteness. I'm not disadvantaged. Here I am, flying halfway around the world. Around the world, I'm middle class. Thus, I think it's necessary to point out when we're talking about encountering Australia and cross-cultural conversations that there's many voices in Australia against those like me or the poor boy in that photo that I showed you early on, against those of us fair-skinned people who proclaim an Aboriginal identity. So I want to offer some headlines from a particularly popular, I think, commentator at home. To be very fair, to be very even-handed, a columnist of considerable influence who would say that someone like me is nothing but an opportunist, leverage. I don't think these people articulated in this way, but it's something like leveraging a group identity for individual kudos and not authentic in that case. These sort of headlines led to considerable heat at home. Court cases, and after which, when the commentator wasn't acquitted as he hoped to be, perhaps that threatened something like that power relationship to which I was referring earlier on. And it even led to proposed changes in some of our best legislation, Racial Discrimination Act particularly, and a lot of talk about freedom of speech from extremely, I would think, privileged and powerful people. Those changes were stopped, thankfully, in my opinion, because many immigrant groups resisted them and argued strongly against them. Those headline voices, these sort of things, were probably surprised at not being supported by the courts and tend to argue that we, or perhaps people like myself, shouldn't make so much of difference. We are after all the same in Australia. And the less sophisticated amongst those voices would probably argue that old thing about we should assimilate, all should assimilate to some theoretical common core of Australian values or something. The question remains, as it did in the past, I think, assimilate to what? Now, this next magic lantern slide is a rather harsh, I think, reaction to that notion. I think it's slyly aggressive, perhaps not even slyly. It's defensive too, I think. And it also doesn't see Aboriginal people as part of Australian identity, despite the international image that's often expressed. And it particularly interested me to put up something like this after those other voices to help us think about maybe there are so many very protective, culturally protective and defensive interests in Australia, not just the Aboriginal versus the Anglo sort of way we often talk, but perhaps we are an insecure multicultural society, with all due respect to what Mike was saying earlier on. Instead of being multicultural in the way it was perhaps envisaged, we just have plural monocultures defensively trying to shore up their own positions, getting smaller and smaller, dominated by strategic and polemical discourses. And that's said by someone who much prefers story and the power of story. And it seems to me, if that is the case, what a terrible dead end we are approaching, if not already there at the moment. So some of the features of the Endangered Language and Stories project that I think I've still got time to get to, that is of language and story embedded and abiding in place, and I'm quoting Tony Swain there, suggest possible solutions to this dead end, I think. So let me, at last, start to talk a little bit about this project, the process, how we put together these stories, and if I can get there, I'd like to talk about some of the ramifications and the nature of those stories as well. I think the process matters, and I think the nature of the stories matter. So I'll try and skim quickly through these next series of slides, which are of a process of returning and consolidating these stories in a home community. And it's about a project concerned with the transmission of knowledge from a small group of elders, here's some of them, their own knowledge in hostile circumstances, how to pass them on to younger members of their community. And also of the return of archival language material of their elders, material collected in 1930 down on the south coast, fathers and uncles and grandparents of these people. I think it's about a consolidation, perhaps preservation, but I like to use the words consolidation and enhancement through sharing. It's a paradox that emerges, I think, and it's a very small instance, the paradox of empowerment through giving story, how that can shift. Perhaps, it's only little numbers I'm talking here, can shift structures and who's in power and who's on the edge, who's at the centre. So let me just quickly go through these as best I can. Oh, one more thing. It relies a lot on picture books, this project. We chose picture books because that was one of the few things that I knew a little of, being a literary man, and also it's a way where you can move a group of people rather than just one author to the interface and give others the opportunity to be there in what can sometimes be quite a powerful, empowering position. I'd like to say also that this process relies on ever-expanding concentric circles. These people are those at the centre of it. And it expands to wider and wider audiences with the same sort of central group, pulsing in and back again. Here's a group of people at the very first workshop, and we started this back at the beginning of the century. It makes it sound very impressive. These are photos of returning archival material to some of these elders who are also giving us their own material, letting us record it, document and pass it on. At this very first of these workshops, there's about 50 people there. Within 5 or 10 minutes of starting, everyone was crying. Different reasons for that, I think, but it was something to do with reconnection, I think. And people were saying, we only ever get together these days like this at funerals. And it was a great privilege to get together like this around stories of our old people and bringing them back to life. So this is returning stuff, this is retelling some of these old stories to a group of invitees, loved ones, trusted ones. Then we move on to having recreated texts, old text in this ancient language, to illustrating them, starting to turn them into picture books so you can involve more people in this process, skilling up people if you like. It's also a gentle way to engage with stories that can cause a certain amount of psychic tension, I think. How come I don't know these stories? How come I don't know this language if I'm calling myself a Noongar person? So you have to confront some of those sort of things. And just doing the pictures is a gentle way of doing that, I think, and sharing the stories in that small group. So I'm just showing these to try and save myself on words, really, and to give you an idea of what's going on. Moves into recreating dances and songs as well as the stories. That's 2 stages of this process so far. The third stage, having made up sort of draft pre-publication picture books of these stories, we make up 100 or so copies and hand them out to a wider circle of this home community and present these booklets to key people, wise heads, we hope, who can help draw us together around these stories, rather than have, as sometimes happens, us getting into a little bit of factional fighting over rivalry about who's closest to these stories and who knows them best or not. An exhibition of the art that's created, and there you have generations in the one family descended from an informant, leaving linguistic material behind. I want to pause here because this is a little aberration in terms of shifts in power relationships. This man being presented with a set of the books is a member of a pioneering family at home. And the elders I'm working with here said, invite this man, invite old Bill Hazel along to give him some of these books. Me, being a nasty and prickly and political individual, said, what do you want to do that for? His family stole our country, and you lived, and your parents lived, virtually like a slave on this man's property. What do you want to include him for now? And they said, well, we grew up with him, Kim, and he knows Noongar language too. We used to speak Noongar language together. So here is a man coming to what's a 99% Aboriginal gathering, invited in, presented, pulled up the front as an important member of this community. It's politically incorrect in many ways, this. And as he returns to his seat, he has tears in his eyes. That's a structural shift from what we were talking about before. Aboriginal people have to be outside of the community. These people are putting themselves in the middle and then sharing it. And it's a powerful, I think it's a powerful act. And you see the power shift in this man's response. So the next stage, what we do in this ever-widening circles, we turn ourselves into the Wiggles, if any of you know the Wiggles. We have a bigger, this sort of a size group like this, mainly Noongar people, but a couple of non-Aboriginal people helping us out. And we go and do a tour of schools, telling them how we put these stories together, where they come from, and telling them the stories and singing them songs in this old language. Here's some shots of this. And there's only 2 of us have operated like this before, in classrooms and with audiences. The others are amateurs. It gets a little bit stressful at times, but it's also enormous fun. To write a song one evening and then start performing it the next day is great, when it works. But you see something happening here, and I think it's probably fair to say, and all the social indicators indicate this, show this, that many Aboriginal people would feel marginalised in institutions, including educational institutions at the periphery, even kids. Where is our stuff in the curriculum? And it's this lovely thing to go into schools with elders, and the elders are reconnecting every Noongar individual they come across. This is where you belong, this is who you connect to. And to have kids knocking on the window saying, can we come in there as well? And teachers in the staff room, can we bring our classes along? That's a power shift happening as well. This thing here is a photo of one in our group who'd composed a song in Noongar language, did it when we went into the school. The next week the whole school did that song at a whole school assembly. That again is, I think, that structural shift from being outside right into the guts and the centre of things, and being empowered through giving. A further stage we do, all pre-publication with these stories, since many of them are creation stories. They belong in a landscape, they connect to place names. We take them back to where they belong. And these are photos of us doing this sort of thing, including social history. Here is a fellow telling us where his 12 and his family used to sleep in this one room on the farm belonging to that gentleman that was presented with books. This is has audio with it. I'll read it out instead since I've been a little bit inept with computer compatibility issues. Here's an elder, Roma Winmar, at the front here, talking. She says, I feel full of tears, I feel full of joy. It's hard to explain, like when somebody's been away for a very long time and they've returned on a journey and you rush out to meet them and there's all these hugs and tears and it's a joy, but you're shedding tears and it's the same sort of thing. Being here with this mob, it's great. Before my mother died, she had a massive stroke, and before she died she said, Roma, as soon as I get better I'll take you back to where I come from, to where we come from, and I'll take you to all these places. The projects now enable me to come to these places, but without my mother. And I suppose it's feeling the loss of her not being here, but maybe she is here in spirit, and that dream is being fulfilled for me. I just take no notice. It's a spiritual journey to be walking this way again, reinforcing that bond to country. So I wanted to offer her words because this storying is about healing as well, about healing a home community connected to this place by bringing back story and sound and language. Another thing that's happened to us in this return to country, we had a story that belonged in what's infamous as massacre country down on the south coast. A particular farm where an altercation was initiated which made this area of country infamous to many Aboriginal people, not only Noongar people, once they heard about it, about all the killing that had happened there in the late 19th century. And many of our elders had never been back to that property. We had story and language that connected to the river that flowed past. And through a bit of luck, and the old gentleman that owned the farm, gentlemen, hearing about what we were up to, invited us onto the property. So with a busload of 25 Noongars, we rocked up. And these old fellas, in a different headspace to ourselves, fundamentalist Christians, creationists, so a very different way of thinking. But somehow, through the stories we're telling of this place, or wanting to be part of that, they invited us back, put on a barbecue for us in the old shearing shed, presented us with some grinding stones that they'd collected in less enlightened times further up the river, showed us around their property to old sites like this waterhole that still had a slab covering it, and we had what's a beautifully symbolic act of uncovering the waterhole, going back to ancestral country. These are the grinding stones they're presenting us with. This is an old freshwater spring in the creek bed of what's normally a salt river when it flows strongly. Here's a bunch of us Willam and Noongars gathered around one of these waterholes with the farmer over on the left, Mr. Thomas. And again, this is the healing possibilities of story, language, community, place being connected, and in fact moving to the centre of a potential society, the potential centre of a potential society, if we can get there. Here is one of these stories. Now, one of the storybooks which I have in the next couple of photos. I'm rushing now. I'm starting to run out of time. 4 books. And a quote from an Aboriginal academic talking about projects of this nature, saying, you can read it for yourself, but saying they offer a narrative in themselves, this process of recovery, if you like, recovering as a community from dispossession, recovering your language and your networks, people, animals, living things that connect to that place. But what I'm suggesting is it's more than that. These sort of processes are more than a good thing for Aboriginal people. the hundreds of different Aboriginal groups across the continent. I would argue that they're really important for the whole community. Mr. Hazel, the tears in his eyes, those old farmers inviting us onto their massacre property. What was that about? They're wanting to heal as well, as we all become more aware of the nature, the harsh nature of our history. I'd like to think the benefits of these sort of processes are kind of obvious, but particularly because they alter that structural situation that I mentioned before, Aboriginal people being outside. Particularly because it's not just resistance, the shrillness that often is associated with resistance and the reactive loop one can get trapped in. It's reconnecting with something pre-colonial and bringing it into the current times. And I'd suggest, what I want to suggest, I've still got time, yes, is the nature of some of these stories themselves are also of immense value. They are not some sort of just so stories in the Kipling sense, why the crow is black. They're not just stories that fit the picture book genre. Let me paraphrase one or two of them. The story Mamang, about a whale, in our little picture book, and it's just a fragment of a very important story, has a man on rocks next to deep ocean, a young Noongar man. A whale surfaces next to him. Me, I'd run away. I'd back off. The boy remembers a story and a song that his father gives him, dances out onto the whale's back, dives into its spout. It's like a cave in there and its heart's like a fire. He sings the song. He becomes the whale resonates with his song and dives. Just think about that. You're trusting your dad's song about a man entering a whale and making the whale take him along the coast. The whale dives at darkness. Silver bubbles disappear. You keep singing this song to make this whale take you where the song says it will. Many times the whale surfaces, nothing, no land. He makes a dive again. Eventually he strands the whale. It's a little bit awkward if you're thinking of passive harmony with nature. The man strands the whale, comes out of the whale. There's two women on the beach. Hey, look at me. I bring this whale to you. Where are you from? He tells them where he's from. They call him people. It's party time, a stranded whale. It's fiesta, festival time. Everyone makes up a song, another story about this hero, our ancestor. A little lapse in the story which concludes with him returning east along the south coast back into the rising sun with the two women who are both pregnant and a whole bunch of children. He gets back, one assumes it stops there, but he gets back. He has orbited, as some people say. He has moved away, trusted his heritage, been prepared to take challenge and challenge himself. He's trusted himself. He has expanded his community sense of the world. He has networked with others. He has expanded their kin and geographic networks, returns home better able to contribute to that community, and with all these vast new networks. Quickly, another story, Noongar Mambara Buckich, very similar, again a solo man, hunting without weapons. So he's either stupid or he's very determined. Tracking a kangaroo, very faint track, absorbed in it. I like to see this as metaphor for literacy, in fact. So absorbed that he comes to the fire of scary spirit creatures, looks up, sees them. They acknowledge him because they realise he is a gifted man to be able to track this animal in these situations. They say, yeah, go on. They look at one another, go on. Here's a talented man, let's see what he can do. He gets the animal, he kills it with his bare hands, he's powerful. He returns and he's respectful. He gives some of the animal to these spirit creatures he's met. A stranger accosts him, says he's stealing, challenges him to a duel with boomerangs. They fight day long. So normally a Noongar couldn't handle a spirit creature like this. This one can. He's found his talents through challenge. He's finding more of his talents through contest. He finishes with him throwing a last boomerang, which spins in the sky so that it looks like a waterhole. The spirit creature recognises it as a special boomerang, trying to grab it, sees his reflection is transfixed, like Narcissus. Our Noongar hero realises his power at that moment, rises into the sky, returns home. When he gets home, they all want to hear his story. This is a recurring theme. You're a powerful man if you return to your community with a story to enrich them. And he's discovered his talents. Meantime, the spirit creature, the boomerang falls to the ground, clatters to the ground. He's all on his own, greedy, aggressive man that he is. Our hero has again orbited, returned home better, able to be enriched. What inspired me in these stories, other than my own, I have my own emotional and psychological needs for getting right into these stories and rebuilding with community. It helped me see parallels in the historical archives at home of first contact. These are awkward moments when Noongar people are so very accommodating and show empathy and great cultural skill to the invaders. They're so confident they do not think. And remember, the story's not over yet. They do not think they can be conquered, or anyone can conquer place. We're all manifestations of the spirit of place. So there's these moments of great cross-cultural skill from what are often referred to as primitive peoples. 12 months of colonisation. Within the first 12 months, a Noongar individual down in my hometown, sitting with soldiers, they are still paying the rent, they're feeding him and everything, rowing him around at this stage. His Noongar brother enters the hut and Mokari sings out. You may well expect it to be something in Noongar language or a traditional song. He sings out, "Where have you been?" the title of our lecture today. "Oh, where have you been all the day, Billy boy, Billy boy?" Showing the others around him that he knows their songs. Do they know his? He's making a functional statement. Where you been, brother? And he is expressing himself cross-culturally, as you do as a Noongar person. You exchange songs and stories. That's how you get to know the inner being of others. The beginning of a 19th century Noongar text song starts in English. How cross-culturally adept is that? What was happening on the other side? Largely derogatory expressions of the other. This one starts and it has a point of view exercise, starts in English and then talks in Noongar about a fella looking through a telescope at the composer on the shore. It's a literary point of view exercise. How sophisticated in the very earliest years, cross-culturally, is that? Another Noongar song collected in the 19th century that has a colonial place name, King Georgetown, a version of King Georgetown at the end. Penny Van Toorn has an Australian academic, if I can put it like that, if that's the appropriate way, has a book called Writing Never Arrives Naked, about oral traditions encountering books and writing and they becoming entangled objects. This is a really interesting example of that. A Noongar man performing the account of an expedition which he has led from Albany, my hometown, and back again. So it's an oral tradition, he performs it, but notice in this quote, the diarist, the observant diarist, realises that in that performance the performer is utilising many of the structural characteristics of that ubiquitous literary form. The expedition journal has made it episodic. So that composer is playing with this new cultural product, this new cultural device, if you like, of the expedition journal. So it's greedily curious cross-culturally. And I'd like to think that's powerful. We are not, and we were not just warriors, particularly in that Australian tradition of failed warriors like Gallipoli. We're much, Noongar people were and are much more than that, and have an enormous amount to offer society, not to be kept on the outside. And when you think about it, there's hundreds of regional Aboriginal groups across the continent. And as I've said perhaps too many times already, so it's becoming a cliche, therein lies the opportunity to anchor a shimmering nation state to its continent through regional peoples. That's why we need to help heal Aboriginal communities so we can cohere and connect in those sort of ways. Another example of that propensity for literature, the technology of pen and ink, adopted and played with by a Noongar individual, 1833, first 4 years of colonisation. Just about run out of time, I think, but I wanted to make a point of how those stories helped me see things in history and inspired, shameless self-promotion, my last novel, That Dead Man Dance, about Aboriginal agency, Noongar agency, greedy curiosity, great empathy, accommodation of the other, cross-culturally gifted. And it made me think, as against writing a novel as there's great pressures on us to do, that supplies ammunition for the cause today, how would those fellas have written a novel? What sort of novel would they write? They were very ready to get stuck into that very thing, gifted with language, literacy, ready to play. I think they would have liked to have used all the devices of literature to seduce people, to share interiorities. And as Eduardo Galeano says, what we writers do is send messages to all our friends in faraway places who we do not yet know and embrace them with our language. I think I'll leave it at that. Thanks very much.